Alright, you guys, so I don't even know where you even start after that final. It's been almost 24 hours since we got the final outcome. It's not like my thoughts are particularly organized yet on that match. You know, all of us collectively were just basically in awe over the last particularly 2 hours of that match. I don't know, I hate the cliche of you wish there were two winners, but this really is one of those rare matches where, yeah, you kind of hate that there had to be a loser, and obviously numerous times it looked like the result and who would be hoisting up that Coupe de Musketeers and who would be given the runners-up plate certainly could have been flipped, but it is Carlos Alcaraz who defends his title, keeps his meteoric, supersonic pace, keeping up with, what I would say is, by a smidge, the greatest start to a career for a men's tennis player, at least of all time. And obviously, it's super hard to definitively say anything on that front. Circumstances super different for everybody that's in the mix for that. But that aside, he does it in the most spectacular fashion, and isn't that crazy? Does it to the day, the exact same age, winning his 5th Grand Slam as Rafa Nadal. In Rafa's case, it was the probably defining moment of his career still in the 2008 Wimbledon final. And now in Carlos Alcaraz's case, the bar is certainly set very, very high, where I don't know if he can ever top this one in particular as his defining moment. And hey, I kind of felt the same way about 2023 Wimbledon final, and I think now this one usurps that in his, already star-studded career, so we never know what could be around the corner. But for now, I think that is the greatest comeback, certainly in a Grand Slam final, but you could argue the greatest single comeback in men's tennis history. Just the sheer number of holes that Carlos Alcaraz was tasked with digging out of. I mean, you look at this match, and he did actually temporarily dig out of one, and lucky for him, that was the only one he was unsuccessful with, but it was only at the second set, where after being down a break throughout much of the second, I think from 2-5 down, breaks at 3-5, keeps that set alive at the way the match was going, a point in time where a lot of us thought it was make or break for him. I know I certainly did. I was like, there's no way he's coming back from 2-0, so he needs to find something and find something quick. And he did. He got it to a second set tiebreak, and Jannik Sinner, to his credit, played an imperious, flawless tiebreak on his end. And you're thinking, just like in the semis, that second set felt must win, and definitely the way that third set started, Alcaraz broke in immediately and 1-0, 30 love down. Obviously most famous, love 40, 3 championship points, and Jannik Sinner still got a chance to serve out the match after that. He dug out of that, and then just when you think the tide had completely swung, and the track record for Jannik physically, vice versa, how sparkling the track record is deep into these matches, long, lengthy matches for Alcaraz, really looked like, he was going to pull away in that 5th, and then all of a sudden Jannik Sinner's returning just ascends from the heavens, breaks Carlos serving for the title 5-4 in the 5th, and with Alcaraz's next service game serving to stay in the match, he's again 2 points away from the exit, 15-30. Sinner really going for it to try to finish him off right there. Even got that game to deuce after Alcaraz, dug out of the 15-30 hole. And every single time, that's the crazy part, is that if you put yourself in the position where you're that close so many times within a match, even if you don't necessarily find that finishing strike, you don't expect your opponent to be able to come through so spectacularly as Carlos Alcaraz did every single time in the face of adversity. Especially with the way that Alcaraz historically has impose what is quickly becoming, and already had become, one of the greatest, and honestly in contention for the greatest clutch gene in tennis history. But the way he does it so often is, it literally is the moniker of like shooter shoot. He never is phased by whether sometimes the overly ambitious shot selection is what might get him into those holes, but it doesn't result in him pulling back ever. And logically, at some point you would think those will miss under pressure, but as we know historically up until this point, he just never seems to. If there's ever a time those big cuts or just top shelf court craft, employing the drop shots, taking to the net, even in the cases where all of that seems low percentage, if ever there's a time you expect Alcaraz to come through in that fashion, it's pretty much been automatic in the clutch. And at every point in time that I highlighted, sure, I can buy that, Sinner played a hand, I think, in leaving the door open a little bit at pretty much every point in time. I mean, even in the second set, I think he kind of just took the scenic route to taking that set. The 1-0 30-love game in the third, I do remember some unforced errors off the forehand on game point when he had a 40-30 in that game, and then down break point to give the break back. Obviously, the flashpoint being the championship points in the fourth set. All three times, I think he had the proper intent, but obviously you're definitely going to be ruining, particularly the second and the third, where he just missed a second serve return, and then, quite honestly, off the return that he hit on the third championship point, I thought that it was over because he got a hanging forehand that I thought that was exactly the ball that he would have been looking for, and he didn't quite go for the kill on it. And he still hit a deep, hard ball that Alcaraz did wonderfully well to just kind of put a lot of RPMs on it, as opposed to, I think, through numerous times in this match when he got hit with a similar ball, he fell into the trap of, trying to hit it back even harder. And in this case, it was not at all easy to just, hit that ball back and hit it back where he did, equally as deep, right inside the baseline. It dipped. But I do think Sinner could have uncorked a little bit more on that forehand in the first place. And then the last one, 15-30, 5-6 Alcaraz serving in the fifth, got into a little bit of a rally on that point and ended up hitting a forehand on forced error. And so, listen, could you call that choky? I think, you can't not say there was an element of choke here, just because the sheer volume of chances here for Jannik Sinner. And as he said after the match, that's why he will lose sleep over this one in the immediate aftermath. But again, at the same time, with that volume of opportunities, you just do not expect your opponent to be able to kick that door down every time that it was left open. And again, I ease off on using the choke word because at no point did Sinner crumble. Did he leave the door open at every turn? I think you can say that. But at no point after leaving the door open did he just, collapse. In fact, the consistent theme after every one of those instances that you can point to that Sinner left the door open, Alcaraz followed it up by just taking the bull by the horns and spectacularly making the most on, a second lease on life every single time. And that's just not from this world. That is extraterrestrial, because you put your opponent under the cosh and keep them there for so long and keep asking the questions. At some point, you expect the resistance to break. And the fact that it was Alcaraz, immediately after all of those moments, he kind of took control of the third after that 1-0 30-love game. And yeah, he got broken serving it out, but he never really relinquished control of the third. Honestly, that's really where the forehand started to percolate and get into that gear that Carlos no doubt needed it to to pull off this comeback all the way. I mean, it was front and center, the tried and true kick serve, inside in forehand. That was a big fixture, and it must be said, I thought Jannik Sinner hit his running forehand anytime Carlos wasn't landing that inside in forehand anywhere near the sideline. Hell, sometimes even when he was landing it near the sideline. But still, obviously, that combo did more than its fair share of damage. One in particular, 4-5, love 30 in the last game of the third, where he hit a forehand down the line that sort of bent in, and it was an absolute beauty. The exact type of fearlessness and ability that Carlos Alcaraz in those high leverage situations has been willing to demonstrate time and time again, and it sort of foreshadowed the type of shot making off that wing that was to come in the absolute most pivotal moments of the match. Fourth set, after hitting that spectacular forehand up the line to keep his, hopes alive and hold in that 3-5 game, I thought the 4-5 return game was more good Alcaraz than poor Sinner, and then turned around to again play an exemplary tiebreak and send it to a fifth. And I mean, you can't say enough about the forehand. The forehand was the cornerstone of this victory. But isn't it funny, it seems like every time Alcaraz is in a pressure situation, that seems to be when he serves best. I mean, you can think of his first slam when the legs were screaming in the U.S. Open final in the fourth set. It was the first serve that saved the day, and, same type of deal to bring home Wimbledon 2023. It was the first serve that made life a whole lot easier in steering that one home, and it was the serve that set the tone in the fourth set tiebreaker. Not a lot of cheap points in this one, but got just enough to get off to the right start in the tiebreaker, and he never looked back. Where it turns out that wasn't even the best tiebreaker he was going to play all day. But again, I mean, yeah, it's sort of nitpicky. The one spot, that forehand unforced there at 15:30 after, all the plot twists throughout the course of that fifth set. But more so than any other instance in this match, it was after that Alcaraz, absolutely took over. And he went nuclear. That's exactly what it was. I don't know if you could say there's anybody that would have been on the other side of that just Alcaraz storm. Really, from the moment he was let out of jail with that 15:30 error, he hit one of the most unbelievable squash shots you'll ever see immediately after, because, Sinner, the returning was just unbelievable in a lot of the fifth set, but especially in that game 5-6, he was charging to finish it off right then and there. And I have no idea how Alcaraz got his racket on that return. It was like a screaming forehand return by Jannik Sinner. And Alcaraz just instinctively reached out that claw, and it just floated right onto the right sideline of Sinner. And then, of course, off of it, he short hops it on a leaping backhand cross winner. And even then, Sinner hit another outrageous return winner immediately after, got it to deuce. And there's really nothing you can say that he could have done better from that point on. I mean, it was Alcaraz with just a flurry down the stretch at the most important phase of the match. So all in all, I definitely think it's more so Alcaraz comeback in the big picture of things, and he deserves more credit than really putting Sinner under any scrutiny. Hell, the fact that this came against Jannik Sinner playing the way that he has played this entire Roland Garros, to me, that's the greatest single match comeback I've ever seen. And just touching on the Sinner side of things, I really sincerely hope that there's not a major hangover after this. He said again that he's gonna lose sleep over this one, and that's perfectly understandable. I mean, this is just that type of beat for whoever had come out on the losing end of things. Honestly, in the immediate aftermath, I think that he's way too good and just that much above the rest of the field right now, where, yeah, the only fellow superhuman is Carlos Alcaraz and Novak Djokovic when he wants to be, who, you already know, I think he'll be dangerous coming up at Wimbledon. But for this loss to, open him up to, some real shocking results like it did Alcaraz in the aftermath of some really major losses like Cincinnati 23, I think also in conjunction with how US Open 23 ended for him, and obviously the Olympics last year, and that sent him into a bit of a tailspin for a couple months in the aftermath. But Sinner's, he's just too good against the field for me to feel that way unless he's injured at this point or physically hampered with illness or something. I do think that the scar tissue of it will probably come up more so the next time he's in a clutch moment, particularly one of those pressure moments against Carlos Alcaraz down the line, which is inevitable. It'll probably be hard not to think about, some of these instances where he was so close in this match. But, on his side of things, there's so much to take solace in. To start with, I had questions about how far he can truly take this thing on clay, and he obviously just blew my expectations out of the water, made me look like a fool, especially over the course of this year's Roland Garros. I was just in awe of how quickly this guy hit the ground running after a 3-month suspension, and overall, you can say hats off, honestly, dealing with all the noise and I think just putting to rest any questions of how good he is certainly just that good, especially now in the aftermath of his positive tests and his suspension, coming out on the other side with easily his best clay form of his career, a surface that I thought he was still most gettable on. He looked absolutely awesome. And to do it so quickly, not even from the break, but from Rome to Roland Garros, how much more comfortable he looked with the physicality, he looked with the movement, which, you knew wouldn't be up to 100% immediately, but it only took him a couple more weeks to get there. And again, that's another thing. He tacks on another match here where he's winless in matches that go over 4 hours, but one is not like the others now. This match, he had the legs. Deep into the 5th, 6th hour of this match, he was turned into a passenger late in this match because of Carlos Alcaraz's brilliance, not because he was any worse for wear deep into the 5th set. It looked like he would be early in the 5th, but he very quickly caught a second wind. And again, mentally, scar tissue, I would expect it to show up maybe in some pressure moments down the line, particularly against the guys where it's a level playing field, which I only see 2 of them on tour right now. But within the confines of this Alcaraz matchup, I said after the Rome final that I thought Jannik's best counter moving forward was going to have to be adjusting how he was playing the rest of the field, where, his regulation baseline, just steadiness, is going to outdo everybody. It's why he has easily the highest floor in tennis right now. But he was going to have to tap into his ceiling within the Alcaraz matchup, something that he was more comfortable doing when he was a worse player, wasn't, the number one Jannik Sinner we've seen since the fall of 2023. And maybe when he was a worse player against Alcaraz back then with lesser expectations, maybe it was easier to just open up the shoulders. But it looked a very concrete way when he had success against Alcaraz, even in the losses last year, the first set of the Indian Wells match and the first set of Roland Garros, their semi last year. It was very much more of the Sinner, blitzkrieg, just sort of overpowering Alcaraz and baiting him into the fighting fire with fire. And even when Alcaraz wasn't mixing it up, I think he did at Indian Wells, last year after that first set, and varying the heights, varying the spins, throwing in some slice. He did that at Rome as well. Those are the two instances with that strategy that really stand out. But when he didn't go to that, that just seemed a lot more conducive to it being played on Jannik Sinner's terms, when he's just rushing him, robbing him of time, and upping the aggression levels beyond his norm. That seemed more like it was played on Sinner's terms than when he was trying to outsteady Alcaraz, which that's been sort of the MO of new age Jannik Sinner. And I thought the way that this match was played was much more along those lines. In fact, I think even despite the fact that Alcaraz was having success early out of the gates, they were still playing that way, where it was just a slugfest, back and forth, just my forehand's bigger than yours. And when Sinner was able to absorb that first punch, Alcaraz breaking first, and certainly Carlos's shortcomings as a second serve returner were on full display throughout that passage of play, even in the second. And I felt that for a while, is like a lot of the times when Alcaraz is doing that semi-saber, it just feels so unnecessary because he misses so many returns that he has no business just not putting in play at the very least. And well, he was doing that whether he dropped back to give himself more time or was standing in, as he was through much of the first set. But even still, once Jannik absorbed that first punch, it felt like Alcaraz sort of went into a little bit of a mental fog and, not as comfortable digging into his bag of tricks. The drop shot was super, super unsuccessful throughout the day until the fifth set. And yeah, I mean, this is the surface where you would think Alcaraz would have the biggest upper hand, but, Jannik had him so thoroughly on the ropes that I think big picture, it should feel good that this match was played more so along a tempo that Sinner would like. I would feel similarly about it the way that Nadal would in the only longer Grand Slam final ever, where, Australian Open 2012 marked Rafa's 7th finals and overall loss in a row to Novak Djokovic, a third Slam final in a row. But it did, big picture, give him some belief that I can live with this guy again. And honestly, no doubt, the nature of this loss, how it happened, it probably does sting more to Jannik than it did back then to Nadal. But I think in due time, it should serve him well in figuring out the answers in this 5-match now slide against Carlos Alcaraz. But what else we got? Other notes. I thought it was kind of crazy how this match evolved, the progression, the timeline. I think through 2, maybe even 2.5 sets, it was nowhere near one of the great matches of all time. I thought, out of the gates, it was awesome for 6-7 games, where I was telling all my friends watching this match, I was like, this feels a far cry from a lot of the matches since US Open 2022.
Where it has felt like these two have sort of been trying to live up to that all-time great match, and knowing the eyes and expectations that are on every single match they've played since, it's resulted in some sloppy, scratchy tennis, has looked super nervy out of the gates and through much of those matches, with the exception of, I would say, Miami 23, of course, Alcaraz, late into that match hitting the physical wall, sort of took away from the luster of that one, even though it started out of this world. And then, obviously, Beijing last year. But after Jannik, hit back, broke back, I thought for the most part, Alcaraz, just went into a similar, mental fog where he looked unnerved, out of ideas at times for a little bit, in a similar way that he was for the middle portion of that Australian Open quarter this year. Played an utterly horrific game to get broken for the first set. And after that, this was really the one, like, imperious patch. I thought for, like, the first half hour or so of the second set, Sinner was sort of untouchable. And that, and then the tiebreaker later in that set was, like, the only times I felt he hit that gear throughout the first two sets. And that's why, like, fleetingly in the back of my mind, I was like, Alcaraz could still get this to a fifth set. I don't think Jannik's playing, like, well enough to definitively be like, this is over. But at the same time, of course, like, the rational part was also just, like, he's not coming back from 2 sets down. And I think that's what's, like, even more stunning in a way was that, yeah, that kind of kept up throughout the third set. And once Alcaraz elevated, it looked like there was a real path for him to see a fifth set. But what's remarkable is Sinner did not stay at that level where it was like he's not playing at some like mind-blowing level that, you know, if Alcaraz pulls it together for stretches, finds a couple hot streaks, there isn't a way back for him. Sinner actually elevated in the fourth and fifth sets. In fact, throughout the course of this match, and obviously the semifinal as well, I believe his first serve percentage was only up at like 51%. And through the first 3 sets, he was, I believe, barely above 50%, if not under 50 in the second, I know. But then fourth and fifth, he was up at like 57 and 60%. Like, Alcaraz pulled off this comeback as Sinner also elevated over the last 2 sets of the match. And I remember after the fourth set, I was like, that's low-key one of the great sets of tennis that I've seen. And, you know, the fifth blew it out of the water. The fifth ended up being, like, high-key one of the best sets of tennis I've ever seen, particularly from the point where Sinner hit that redrop, remarkable redrop at 4-5, 15-30, when he was returning to stay alive in the match. From that point on, just about every point that was played, like, damn near took my breath away. It was truly just spellbinding stuff. And, like, even the following 5-all game, I thought it was really important for Alcaraz just to, you know, not let go of the rope in that moment after being broken while serving it out. But, you know, in that game, he really just kept imposing his presence that, like, I'm still here, I'm not going anywhere. That game went to deuce from 40-15, and he really made Jannik, like, earn it, because it was just exchanges of, like, barrages of Sinner forehands on the 2 points of that game where he did finally convert, one with, like, an inside in forehand after an extended rally, and then another just pasted forehand down the line by Sinner. I talked about the just, you know, magical squash shot at 30-all, and it's hard to feel like, you know, it was destiny right then. I'm not gonna lie and say that I felt, okay, he's not losing after that, because that's just the nature of a super tiebreak. And even when Alcaraz got out to that big lead, I think hit that ridiculous, like, swing volley at, like, 3-0, I want to say, where it might have gone out, but you don't want to leave anything to chance, and it's not even like he just backpedaled to let it bounce and potentially, like, get back to neutral with Sinner at net. But yeah, he just instincts lunged at it and whacked it out of the air cross for a winner. And that's just, you know, the type of genius that this kid is capable of, bottled into 1 point, you know, that too with the highest of pressure and highest of stakes. Absolutely unbelievable. And of course, what a way to finish that Alcaraz avalanche in the breaker with another ridiculous running forehand pass up the line. And yeah, that turns out to be absolutely massive. Alcaraz defends at least the turf where he'd be more comfortable, and Sinner less so, albeit Jannik's ceiling on the surface has increased tenfold in the aftermath of this tournament. And yeah, this is why we've been waiting so long for these two to meet for the right to claiming the biggest prizes in the sport. We got the first big final in Rome, and then we get the first slam final at Roland Garros, which, yeah, they're going to have trouble one-upping, but I'm sure a lot of us thought the same, the last couple meetings after that US Open 22 quarter set the bar so high. And now we are definitively in the age of, shout out Jim Courier for coining this, but the new two winners of the last 6 slams, split at 3 apiece. Alcaraz continues to hold his ground on the natural surfaces. And side note, how impressive is it that at 22 years of age, he's already mounted successful title defenses of both Roland Garros now and Wimbledon, which he did last year. But yeah, he continues to hold firm natural surfaces. Jannik has, maintained a bit of an empire on the hard courts. And if this is any sign, you'll be damn sure that each one will be, mounting some advances to try and snatch those home courts from the other. And from that standpoint, a lot of excitement on the horizon. This match all around was absolutely awesome. Basketball being my second favorite sport, it was awesome to see a lot of people on NBA Twitter that I would have never thought to be tuning into a tennis match, just every bit as gripped into the excitement, the allure that this match created as the rest of us. And that goes for, everybody outside of the tennis bubble that this match seemed to touch. Which, yeah, just as tennis fans, that's so exciting just to see the outpour of respect given to the sport, with the masses able to see the sport at its very best, which is certainly what yesterday's final provided. And also just shout out TNT for, at least in the States, making this tournament a whole lot more accessible for everybody, and in the process, the sports gods seem to rain down all the gifts on them of one of the most exciting Roland Garros tournaments ever. How lucky were they to have this as their inaugural event, covering tennis, going from, the grand Nadal ceremony, day one of the tournament, awesome men's, women's tournaments, one of the great championship weekends of all time between the semis and finals. And ultimately, yeah, we're all indebted to these two guys in particular. I said it after the US Open 22 final, but it is truly incredible how, relatively not that long ago, the Federer, and even, this is basically the official Nadal goodbye 2 weeks ago on Chatrier, how soon that was and how quickly, the sport replenishes itself. New superstars almost immediately coming about. Obviously incredible that, the vestiges of that era still loom large, and Novak Djokovic still in that mix somewhat. But as he said, in a way where he's no longer the hunted, he's more so the hunter. But obviously after the final, you just feel all types of, we're really lucky to have the two of them. What talents, and ultimately, what a player Carlos Alcaraz is. Truly an anomaly. I was ready to make a preview for the final the night before, but I honestly just happened to just conk out and go to bed. I was totally about to pick Alcaraz in 5, because, again, Sinner had made me, reevaluate his chances in that match after I was so impressed by the semi. And even so, with that prediction, the actual match, as I'm sure for everybody, ended up blowing all expectations out of the water. I expected 5, certainly not like that. What a note to end clay court season on, and what a clay court season by Carlos Alcaraz. Just the one defeat where he wasn't 100% in Barcelona, but titles in Monte Carlo, Rome, and now Roland Garros, which I'm sure will stand the test of time as one of, if not the cornerstone victory of Carlos Alcaraz's career. That Sunshine Double now feeling a long time ago, as he will now continue the charge on the grass courts, which have obviously been so friendly to him over the last 2 years. But yeah, certainly one of the great sporting moments, events I've ever been witness to in my life. I felt things down the stretch that I don't think I've ever felt before watching a tennis match. What an ode to this game in its peakiest form. What an ode to the undefeated tennis scoring system. What an ode to best of 5, the works, etc., etc. It's sort of an understatement to say that people will talk about this one and remember this one for eternity. What a match. But that'll do it for my yapping. I hope that it wasn't too painstaking to make it this far. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help this video perform better in YouTube's algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see you all in the next one.